This morning's scripture lesson comes from the 5th chapter of Matthew, verses 21 through 26. That's Matthew 5, verses 21 through 26. You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, "You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment." But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, "Raka," is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, "You fool," will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you were offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
I have some news for you. You're probably wondering, why on earth was T-Rex so mad? It's because his parents couldn't hug him. You know, the short arms. We're going to be talking about anger today. This is the 5th in 7 weeks of this series, so we're coming toward the end next week. You probably can't wait. It's gluttony, and then the week after that will be lust. So please be praying for us, because these have been hard, I'm telling you. Well, when we look at our passage this morning, and we even think, we joke around about anger, but it does seem in the last number of years that people getting angry has just escalated. They get angry so easily, stay angry for a long period of time, and it just seems to keep excelling. And so we wanted to talk about this a little bit today with regard to anger. Most of the time when we encounter anger in the Bible, it's negative, just so you're aware of that. Jesus made a big point of it. You heard in the reading that Pastor Adam read this morning that Jesus takes this twist on one of the 10 commandments. You've heard it said that you shall not murder. I'm telling you, you should not even get angry. Because if we get angry, it will lead to all sorts of other things, and we're going to get to that in just a second as well. And so Jesus' goal in saying that is he wants us to be in right relationship with others. Even be careful what you say about them or to them. Raka means you fool. To be careful with that and not to let anger set in our hearts, but to make sure that we're striving to be in right relationship with other people. He puts it on a plane or on a level that it's so important. You need to make things right even before you come to worship. That's what he's getting after here. So when we think about anger, especially bad anger, or the way that it's a vice, it has to do with misdirected anger, but also excessive or anger that's out of control. So when we think about misdirected anger, it's usually at a person or something rather than what that person necessarily maybe has done. So hopefully that makes sense, and it's tied to justice. So if we're not exhibiting justice and we're angry at somebody, we need to check ourselves and try to find out why, and then look for ways to balance those scales, the justice scales. So if we lose our passion for justice and anger ends up overcoming that, it leads to selfish decisions and perpetuates the anger, which is exactly what we see happening in another place in the scriptures. And so I want to look at this story to help us understand what anger can do to us if we're not very careful. And it actually comes from an Old Testament story in Genesis 4, involving Adam and Eve's first 2 children, Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel came and they offered offerings to the Lord, and this is what happens when they offered those offerings. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule." Saying physically to somebody else, or whatever the case is, that leads to further damage or leads to escalating the sin when it comes to this vice of anger. We probably know people in that category as well, right? And what happens when we hang on to the anger as a sin for too long and we won't let it go is it damages our relationship, well, with God, but it damages our relationship with ourselves and certainly with other people as well. Because we'll get to this point a lot of times where we ended up kind of digging in our heels and we don't want to give, we don't want to let go of that, or left out. Jesus got angry. Now, here's where it differs when it comes to Jesus. Because though Jesus would get angry and sometimes express that anger, whether it be verbally or we know there's a physical experience where he overturned some tables, right? Jesus never, ever retaliated against somebody else or sought to physically harm those that he felt the anger toward their actions. So for example, we see this played out in the New Testament repeatedly throughout Jesus' ministry. Now, if you look throughout Scripture, you'll find Jesus healed a lot of people, right? But there's a lot of times Jesus healed on Sabbath, which really, really upset the religious leaders and the teachers of the law in his day. Now, their reaction was so different, though. Because the religious leaders and teachers at that point sought to do away with Jesus. They wanted to physically harm him. While Jesus was simply trying to bring about justice. And so whether it was healing somebody who was lame or doing something else that would upset them, usually it was because, again, those scales of justice were out of whack and Jesus sought to restore the balance. And throughout all of it, again, Jesus never, ever retaliated, even though he was being treated unjustly, and Jesus never sought revenge. Yeah, it did make him mad that people were simply trying to protect their reputation. But the way Jesus expressed righteous anger, it's completely linked to justice. That's at the heart of it, but it's born out of love. Love is central to it. Now, when I think about that with Jesus and myself, I'm not so sure sometimes the anger I express in my life, and there are times I get hot under the collar, I get mad. And sometimes it's probably not all coming from the right place. And then I think, oh my goodness, I am so glad that the way I express and experience God's forgiveness and God's reaction to my anger is so different than the way God reacts to all of our anger. Because the way I express anger, and probably all of you here, it's in a specific moment in time, right? It's confined to this. And my vision, it's like we have, to some degree, we've got tunnel vision because we live here in this particular bracket of time, in this context. While God, his view of humanity is so different because God sees all of the world, all of time, all of it. And so here's what I love when we encounter how God reacts when it comes to anger. And I'm going to back up a second before I tell you that one, because often I hear so many times people will say, well, the God of the Old Testament just seems angry, but the God of the New Testament is all about love. It's God, the same God through all of it, okay? God's no different in the Old Testament than God is in the New Testament. And here's what we learn about God. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. Oh, isn't that amazing? And I think of God reacting that way when God sees all of humanity, all of time and everything, and the way I react in this particular moment in time, and it blows my mind. The writer of we call it the letter, the book of James, he starts, there's a phrase in there that he pulls from, I believe, when he tells us to be quick to listen, slow to anger, slow to speak, so that we might also respond in grace and with mercy. Now, I'm not so sure that's our natural or the first reaction to go to when we're upset or angry, is it? Not always. There's an individual in more recent history that has also come to my mind when thinking about this sermon today. And I'm sure we all know who he is, Martin Luther King. And when I think about Martin Luther King and his life experience and the life experience that a lot of his relatives and friends lived and endured, it blows my mind the way he sought to respond. Because he lived and demonstrated the same kind of anger that Jesus did. Righteous anger. He wanted justice to flow down like a mighty river. And that's what he sought, was justice. And I think, my goodness, this guy had so much to be angry about, right? He could have let that anger and that hatred just fill his heart. And yet he didn't. He strove to make sure that everyone was seen as a precious child of God. That people were treated equally, fairly, justly. Boy, and I think, wow, he's just one example, and there's so many more where I could think these people, he, along with all the others, had every, I don't know if right, but every reason to be angry and to be filled with so much hate, and yet they chose love. And so what do we do, or how do we deal with anger? Because there seems to be an awful lot of it today. An awful lot. I find it exhausting, quite frankly. What caused it, and then also come back to it again after a week and reflect on it. Has anything changed? Is something different? Has your anger subsided, or have you learned something about what caused it that you might be able to deal with it more effectively the next time? And it's also helpful to look then, how many times were you finding you got angry? Is the number exorbitant? Again, that might be a little bit of an indicator that there's more going on and that it might require something else. And that's where I feel like talking to a counselor or a therapist can help, and there's no shame in it. There's absolutely no shame. But it might help you get to the root cause of the anger, so that hopefully you can begin to heal. Now, it's an emotion. Anger is an emotion. But you might not notice or realize either that it's actually connected to the body. How many of you find when you are more tired or you're stressed because of work or things going on in life that you get irritated or you get angry a little easier? I do. You know, there's things that can help with that. Try to get a little more rest. Find out what's actually causing the stress and try to alleviate some of that so that you avoid the angry part. And then there's also other things with the person. Go to the person and try to resolve it. And if you can't, then take somebody else with you as a mediator and seek to try to resolve or get to the bottom of what's going on. Again, I'm so grateful that God sees the whole picture, that God is gracious and merciful,